I am Dungeon Thrasher Lenny Blade, and this is the Dungeons and Thrashers show, and more specifically, it's the Adventures in Middle-earth. And this is episode 11, the Lonely Mountain Region Guide. And in this series of videos I go through Cubicle 7's Dead product line, which they released setting books, Middle-earth setting books for the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rule set. So that's what I'm taking a look at. And today it's time for the Lonely Mountain Region Guide. And if you like dwarves or dragons, this is a book you cannot pass up. And it doesn't matter if you play in Middle-earth or not, because there's a lot of good stuff here for your regular like 5th edition or Dungeons & Dragons players. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Alright, the first thing I would like to mention is that I think that this product sells itself short on the name alone, right from the get-go. The Lonely Mountain Region Guide, as this actually covers Dale in great detail, as well as the Iron Hills. And it goes up to the Grey Mountains in the north, and the Waste, and the what's called the Upper Marshes, the Long Marshes, and the Nether Marshes. And Dorwinion is mentioned only because it's actually hundreds of miles away down south following the river, but it's mentioned in a blurb only. I do think that they could have included Dorwinion in a little bit more detail. I wonder if there were any Merp products that detailed Dorwinion as it would have looked at around this time between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. If there were, just let me know please in the comments, and I'll try to obtain it by any means. Alright, and as it should, the Lonely Mountain Region Guide starts off by detailing Erebor with maps and the history from the founding in 1999 by the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. After they awoke, the quote-unquote unseen terror. We all know which terror that was now, but at the time they didn't really know what it was. That killed the king there, Durin, and his son a year later, and then they abandoned Khazad-dûm and they renamed it Moria. And then the history goes all the way up to the restoration of Erebor that was started after the Battle of the Five Armies, after the successful quest for Erebor by Thorin and his company. And the restoration is still continuing in this timeline. So adventurers who wishes to enter Erebor for the first time must be accompanied by someone who already has access to Erebor, or a patron that would be respected there, Gandalf for example. Any dwarf is free to visit Erebor, of course. Dwarves from the Blue Mountains, the Iron Hills, or the Grey Mountains for example. Though they may not bring in a whole company with them, unless there are very specific circumstances, of course. Detailed dwarfs include King Dane Ironfoot, of course, and the surviving members of Thorin's company. Gloin, Oin, Beaver, Bofer, Bomber, Balin, Dori, Ori, and Nori and Dwalin. And the treasures of Erebor are still very tempting, and the corruption is deep in the mountains. So any pure-hearted characters and characters with the shadow weakness Dragon Sickness who spends a fellowship phase at Erebor must all roll a d20, and at a 1 that character receives a shadow point. There are 2 new fellowship undertakings. The first one is that you can visit Thorin's tomb. The following adventuring phase, the member that visited the tomb can remember Thorin's sacrifice, and you may recover hit dice equal to your proficiency bonus rounded up. So that's a very, very powerful undertaking. You can also pay homage to the Ravens of Raven Hill, which is named after the long-lived species of ravens that lived there. Remember that in Middle-earth, ravens and birds and things like they live a a long time thrashers and ravens and things like that. So if you do this, if you undertake this fellowship undertaking, you can summon a raven and ask it to perform a simple task for you. And this undertaking is available only to dwarves and bardings, which are people from Dale. The next chapter is on the treasure of the dwarves and dwarven craftsmanship. And it's mentioned that the dwarves of the third age aren't nearly as great as the mastersmiths of the first age. You know, like the Nogrod and Belagos dwarves, for example. And it goes into detail about how to create Nogrod and Belagos enchanted weapons, armor, headpieces, and things like that. So items from these places should have 3 enchanted qualities, whereas Khazad-dûm smiths worked with superior material. Remember, this was where they first discovered mithril, or true silver. Items from Khazad-dûm are only allowed 2 enchanted qualities, for example. But it's a really slick system for creating wondrous and enchanted items, and it expands greatly on what's found in the Lore Master's Guide, including 5 new qualities, 6 famous dwarven weapons and pieces of armor, and a new fellowship undertaking as well. And this is the favorite undertaking of any dwarf player, and it's called Dwarven Smithing. So once you've got a proficiency bonus of +4, I think that's level 9 or 10 or something, you can return home during a fellowship phase and spend the cold season in the forges to attempt a great work. And so the way this works is very intricate, but it takes several fellowship phases. So in between adventures, you go back and you continue to work on this masterpiece. And any dwarf can only make one masterwork in his lifetime. And so once your dwarf character is level 9 or 10 or whatever, when you have a +4 proficiency bonus, you can go home and start working, and you can push yourself really hard, and you can gain shadow points, and you can just stay in the forges, and it's really narrative, and it's a really cool... I mean, if you're a dwarf, this is something that you would want to do. There is also a chapter on the war of dwarves and orcs, and this is not only a history lesson, it's a very good read, but there are also ideas on how to tie dwarf heroes into the war. So dwarves older or around 150 years of age would have fought in the war, and even younger ones could have an heirloom from the war in mind. And any dwarf player is advised to read the info on the war of the dwarves and orcs, this chapter, carefully and tie it into his character. And there are some ways that you can do that. There's also a page on how to use blighted area rules from the player's guide in more detail when traversing through old battlefields and such places during a journey. So you roll for the corruption save as normal, but if the player rolls a natural 1, then you roll an additional d6 and you determine the experience of the player. So you can become haunted, you can have a minor insight or major insight. So the haunted one means that you gain the shadow point as per the rules, but during the day and night that follows, the character will have nightmarish visions. And after each episode, the character gains a shadow point. So that's very bad. The minor insight means that you gain the shadow point as usual, but you experience visions or dreams relevant to the place of corruption in a spectator kind of way. So you would be like the spectator of a battle going on, for example, or a murder or something like that. If the major insight means that you don't get the shadow point, and these visions the player can affect and may do in a way that frames his actions, so that the lore master can answer one question about the blighted place, and this in turn could lead to a clue about, the coming adventure, like where were they journeying to and what they were doing there. So there are some ideas on how to implement that. There are also some treasures of the War of Vengeance, which this war was called, the War of Dwarves and Orcs. And so we have Durin's Ring, the Armor of Nain, and the Red Axe of Dane, for example. So some really cool stuff going on here. Connected to this is also a new fellowship phase undertaken, and this is really Tolkien-esque. I haven't used that word yet. And it's about dwarven grudges. So during a fellowship phase, a dwarven hero may choose to develop a grudge. The grudge must be towards one of the free peoples. So like bardings or woodmen or elves or something. So the pros is that when choosing the heal corruption, you reduce the shadow score by 4 points. No roll needed. However, the con is that if there is an audience with the begrudged kind of people, then you must make a corruption save at DC 10 and plus your current shadow score, or receive a shadow point. So I thought that was very thematic. There are 2 new cultures in the Lonely Mountain Region Guide, the Dwarves of the Iron Hills and the Dwarves of the Grey Mountains. So today Dane is the new king under the mountain and the ruler of Lonely Mountain, and his son Thorin Stonehelm serves as sort of the steward of the Iron Hills. Basically, Dwarves of the Iron Hills are the most martial of all the Dwarven cultures, and they get a total of +4 ability score improvements, +2 to both con and strength, which is like if you're creating a Dwarven fighter, then the Iron Hill dwarf culture is definitely the way to go. Of course, they share a lot of the other, like the virtues and the cultural heirlooms of their other brothers of the Lonely Mountain, for example. They get a new virtue called Sworn Allegiance, in which they start adventuring after the first long rest during an adventure. So they start with inspiration, and if the company consists of more than 50% dwarves, you gain inspiration after every long rest. So that's pretty cool. So that's one of the virtues. The Grey Dwarves are more like wandering tradesmen, and it's a bit of a stretch, I think. I didn't really like them. It seems like they were put in there just to increase the number of dwarven cultures. I'm not super impressed, and do we really need all of these different culture of dwarves? I guess it's another player option. But you want to hear about the dragons, right? So, to the people of Middle-earth, they are more known as great worms in legends and so forth, not necessarily dragons. But, so apart from the expected fluff of history, there's a chapter on hatching a dragon. Now, this is done in 5 steps. Step 1, choose age and breed, and that determines the starting attributes and natural armor of the dragon. This will be further modified by breed and so on. And there are 3 breeds, cold drakes, fire drakes, and longworms, and it has information on all of those. Step 2 is define personality. Information on positive and negative expectations for use with the audience rules and so on. It also comes with a motivation. Step 3 is choose actions and features. Now this is the favorite part for the DM, where he can have a lot of fun. So there are 35 draconic features to choose from, and they're all super cool. So it would take forever to go through them all, but I'm just going to give you 2 examples. Gem waistcoat is one, and that's, like the one Smog had, after sleeping for centuries upon a hoard. The gemstones get sort of embedded into the belly of the beast. And it lets the dragon ignore the damage of one opportunity attack per round, which makes the dragon lets the dragon choose his targets without fear of opportunity attacks. The other one I wanted to mention is Sinister Speech, which is very thematic. So as an action, the dragon can address his adversaries with evil words. And so you have to make, the characters have to make wisdom saving throws or suffer disadvantage on attacks against the dragon. Okay, step 4 is the Lair and Horde. Now this is probably the player's favorite part. So this part contains lair actions and regional effects, which is more for the DM, of course. But it also has the dragon horde, so it has random treasure and trinket tables, etc., and expanding on the horde rules that I talked about in another supplement. So treasures and things like that. That's very cool. Step 5, the name and the backstory. And there are some information and some advice on how to do that. And this chapter rounds off with a paragraph on hunting dragons, including some magical or wondrous items to assist in hunting dragons, meeting a dragon and how you deal with that, and finally rumors about dragons. And it also has 3 pre-made dragons, pre-gen dragons, complete with stat block, adventure hooks, backstory, and anything else. So that's it. This is the Lonely Mountain Region Guide, and it is, of course, strongly recommended, like all the other books in this series, almost. So, and of course, you can use some of these rules even with a regular D&D 5th edition game. So, strongly recommended. See ya!